Good morning. Thanks for joining me today. This morning we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1, through chapter 19, verse 10. And this is, again, after David is pushed out of the land by his son Absalom, who has seized the throne. And this is after, I think Hushai, the Archite, frustrates the good advice of Ahithophel and convinces Absalom to amass a huge force to fight against David. David assembled the army that was with him. He appointed leaders of thousands and leaders of hundreds. David then sent out the army, a third under the leadership of Joab, a third under the leadership of Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under the leadership of Ittai the Gittite. The king said to the troops, "I too will indeed march out with you." But the soldiers replied, "You should not do this, for if we should have to make a rapid retreat, they won't be too concerned about us. Even if half of us should die, they won't be too concerned about us. But you are like 10,000 of us, so it is better if you remain in the city for support." Then the king said to them, "I will do whatever seems best to you." So the king stayed beside the city gate, while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. The king gave this order to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai: "For my sake, deal gently with the young man Absalom." Now, the entire army was listening when the king gave all the leaders this order concerning Absalom. Then the army marched out to the field to fight against Israel. The battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. The army of Israel was defeated there by David's men. The slaughter there was great that day. 20,000 soldiers were killed. The battle there was spread out over the whole area, and the forest consumed more soldiers than the sword devoured that day. Then Absalom happened to come across David's men. Now as Absalom was riding on his mule, it went under the branches of a large oak tree. His head got caught in the oak, and he was suspended in midair, while the mule he had been riding kept going. When one of the men saw this, he reported it to Joab, saying, "I saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." Joab replied to the man who was telling him this, "What? You saw this? Why didn't you strike him down right on the spot? I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a commemorative belt." The man replied to Joab, "Even if I were receiving 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not strike the king's son. In our very presence the king gave this order to you and Abishai and Ittai: protect the young man Absalom for my sake. If I had acted at risk of my own life, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have abandoned me." Joab replied, "I will not wait around like this for you." He took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them into the middle of Absalom while he was still alive in the middle of the oak tree. Then 10 soldiers who were Joab's armor-bearers struck Absalom and finished him off. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the army turned back from chasing Israel, for Joab had called for the army to halt. They took Absalom, threw him into a large pit in the forest, and stacked a huge pile of stones over him. In the meantime, all the Israelite soldiers fled to their homes. Prior to this, Absalom had set up a monument and dedicated it to himself in the king's valley, reasoning, "I have no son who will carry on my name." He named the monument after himself, and to this day it is known as Absalom's Memorial. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and give the king the good news that the Lord has vindicated him before his enemies." But Joab said to him, "You will not be a bearer of good news today. You will bear good news some other day, but not today, for the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to the Cushite, "Go and tell the king what you have seen." After bowing to Joab, the Cushite ran off. Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, again spoke to Joab, "Whatever happens, let me go after the Cushite." But Joab said, "Why is it that you want to go, my son? You have no good news that will bring you a reward." But he said, "Whatever happens, I want to go." So Joab said to him, "Then go." So Ahimaaz ran by the way of the Jordan plain, and he passed the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate at the wall. When he looked, he saw a man running by himself. So the watchman called out and informed the king. The king said, "If he is by himself, he is bringing good news." The runner came ever closer. Then the watchman saw another man running. The watchman called out to the gatekeeper, "There is another man running by himself." The king said, "This one is also bringing good news." The watchman said, "It appears to me that the first runner is Ahimaaz, son of Zadok." The king said, "He is a good man, and he comes with good news." Then Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, "Greetings." He bowed down before the king with his face toward the ground and said, "May the Lord your God be praised, because he has defeated the men who opposed my lord the king." The king replied, "How is the young man Absalom?" Ahimaaz replied, "I saw a great deal of confusion when Joab was sending the king's servants and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was all about." The king said, "Turn aside and take your place here." So he turned aside and waited. Then the Cushite arrived and said, "May my lord the king now receive the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today and delivered you from the hand of all who have rebelled against you." The king asked the Cushite, "How is the young man Absalom?" The Cushite replied, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who have plotted against you be like that young man." The king then became very upset. He went up to the upper room over the gate and wept. As he went, he said, "My son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I could have died in your place. Absalom, my son, my son." Joab was told, "The king is weeping and mourning over Absalom." So the victory of that day was turned to mourning, as far as all the people were concerned. For the people heard on that day, "The king is grieved over his son." That day the people stole away to go to the city, the way people who are embarrassed steal away in fleeing from battle. The king covered his face and cried out loudly, "My son Absalom! Absalom, my son, my son!" So Joab visited the king at his home. He said, "Today you have embarrassed all your servants who have saved your life this day, as well as the lives of your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your concubines. You seem to love your enemies and hate your friends, for you have as much as declared today that leaders and servants don't matter to you. I realize now that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, it would be all right with you. So get up now, and go out and give some encouragement to your servants. For I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out there, not a single man will stay here with you tonight. This disaster will be worse for you than any disaster that has overtaken you from your youth right to the present time." So the king got up and sat at the city gate. When all the people were informed that the king was sitting at the city gate, they all came before him, but the Israelite soldiers had all fled to their own homes. All the people throughout all the tribes of Israel were arguing among themselves, saying, "The king delivered us from the hands of our enemies. He rescued us from the hand of the Philistines, but now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed as our king, has died in battle. So now, why do you hesitate to bring the king back?" Yeah. So, Absalom is slain. He who vaunted himself against the throne of David here is dead. Yeah, so you have David dividing his troops into 3 companies and sending them out in battle against this large force of the Israelites. I'm not sure how many there are with him, but it seems like, well, I don't even want to speculate here. There's some 600 men with the king. Is that it? That would be crazy if so, given the numbers here, of 20,000 soldiers who were killed. But there's an interesting line in the middle that in 2 Samuel 18:8, the battle there was spread out over the whole area, and the forest consumed more soldiers than the sword devoured that day. It seems that there was divine intervention on behalf of David, where the forest itself rises up against the troops of Absalom, which, crazy. To me, I was thinking, what a huge amount of people to die as a result of this uprising from Absalom. And wasn't it Absalom that did this thing? But I think to me it highlights the personal responsibility of each one of us, to choose to choose the right thing, rather. That I don't think any one of us can say, I was just following orders, because God looks at the hearts of all men and sees what they chose, what their thoughts were regarding a matter, and they are judged in that. To me, it's similar to instances where you have the Israelites choosing someone other than Moses and suffering the consequences for that. It's interesting that Absalom is riding a mule here. A crossbreed between a donkey and a horse. Absalom's name, Abi Salam, my father is peace. But it's interesting because, a horse is closely associated with war, and a donkey is associated with peace. But here you have this crossbreed that Absalom is riding on, which is interesting. But also in Absalom's case here, you have the forest consuming in his case as well, because he gets caught with by his vanity, in that the great deal of hair that Absalom has ends up getting him caught in the woods, hanging by his hair between heaven and earth. Yeah, and then a soldier sees Absalom hanging and tells Joab, and Joab's like, "Why didn't you kill him?" And the soldier's like, "If I would have killed him, you wouldn't have defended me." Because the king said, treat the young man Absalom gently for my sake. And then Joab is like, enough of this, I'm doing it myself. And he does. And then you have these two messengers here, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, who wants to deliver the news. But Joab realizes that this news is bad. So it's like, you really shouldn't, because you're not going to get a reward for going out and doing this. And so he sends this Cushite instead. But Ahimaaz runs after him. And then you have the king, observing these things as these two runners approach the stronghold where he is. And if it isn't a interesting piece of self-delusion there, where it's like, oh, there's one man running alone, he's bringing good news, and it's like, there's two men, Well, I'm sure they still bring good news. The first one's a him as, oh, he's a good man. He's bringing good news. It's like it's wishful thinking on David's part. And then you have a him as tactfully dodging the bad news and just saying, "Hey, we had a general victory. Look, the army has been victorious over the enemies of the king. I'm not sure about Absalom. What's going on there?" So he's trying to get the reward there, being the first one to bring the news. And then the Cushite delivers the news about Absalom, and the king is distressed. So much so that despite the overwhelming victory that David's forces enjoyed, they stole away like they had been defeated in battle. Just like a complete sheepishness of just deserting to each one's house. And Joab is really peeved at the king and essentially goes in and like, "Do you love your enemies and hate your friends?" So the king gets up and goes out, and everybody's like, "Well, we had this king Absalom, but now he's dead. I guess we should make David our king again." So oh man. So what crazy paths we weave for ourselves. From Guzik here. David numbered the people who were with him and set captains. David knew just what to do in organizing his army. He set them into 3 divisions under the leadership of Joab, Abishai, and Ittai the Gittite. "I also will surely go out with you." David knew that the commander belonged out in the battle. He didn't want to repeat his previous mistake of not going to battle when he should have. "You shall not go out." The people surrounding David would not allow him to go out to battle with the rest of his army. There were 3 reasons why they insisted on this. His life was more valuable. "You are worth 10,000 of us. He could bring reserves if needed. You are now more help to us in the city." They understood that it would be hard for David to fight against his own son Absalom. "Whatever seems best to you, I will do." David was not stubborn. He knew how to submit to the good advice of others. He did not give up leadership. He practiced good leadership by listening to the wise advice of the people around him. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. They were willing to take on sacrifice and danger for the benefit of their king. Their devotion to David is an example of how the believer should be devoted to the King of Kings, Jesus Christ. Yeah, and it's striking to me that while it was still peacetime and Absalom was within the country of Israel and there with easy access to the king, like, he should have been disciplined then. How much heartache would this have saved over the slaughter of 20,000? But now it's come to blows. Now the king had commanded. David wanted it clearly known that Absalom was to be captured alive and should not be mistreated in any way. And all the people heard. David gave this commandment in the presence of all the people, so that the captains would feel greater pressure to do what David commanded. So the people went out into the field of battle against Israel. Those loyal to David fought against Israel, because Israel was not loyal to David. Israel was seduced by Absalom's charisma and power. The people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David. The experienced leadership of David and his captains was probably the main reason for their overwhelming victory. David had arranged the battle should take place in this terrain, where the experience and courage of each individual soldier counted more than sheer numbers, from Baldwin. And the woods devoured more people that day than the sword. This phrase implies that God fought for David in unusual ways. Soldiers loyal to Absalom seemed to be swallowed up by the woods. From Spurgeon, perishing not only by the sword, but among the thick oaks and tangled briars of the wood. which concealed fearful precipices and great caverns into which the rebels plunged in their wild fright when the rout set in. From Clark, it is generally supposed that when the army was broken, they betook themselves to the woods, fell into pits, swamps, and so forth, and being entangled, were hewn down by David's men. But the Chaldee, Syriac, and Arabic state that they were devoured by wild beasts in the wood. Absalom rode on a mule. Absalom's vanity put him in this battle against the wise counsel of Ahithophel. Absalom didn't seem like a great general riding a mule into battle. Yeah, Ahithophel, Hushai had advised that Absalom lead this army out with him in front to appeal to the pride of Absalom. His head caught in the terebinth, so he was left hanging between heaven and earth. Absalom was noted for his good looks and his luxurious hair. What was his glory was now his curse. Absalom was literally caught by his own hair in the thick trees of the forest. Adam Clarke is careful to point out that the text does not say that Absalom was caught by his hair. We assume that. It may be that he was caught by his neck. Nevertheless, the image remains of Absalom hanging in the tree. So he hung between heaven and earth, as rejected of both from trap. Absalom's end was beset with terrors. When he was caught in the branches of the oak tree, he was about to sever his hair with a sword stroke, but suddenly saw hell yawning beneath him, and he preferred to hang in the tree to throwing himself into the abyss alive. Absalom's crime was indeed of a nature to deserve the supreme torture, for which reason he is one of the few Jews who have no portion in the world to come. From Ginsberg's Legends of the Jews. Interesting. I just saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. When this was reported to Joab, the general wondered why the man did not immediately kill Absalom. The man replied that he did not do it out of obedience and faithfulness to David. Joab insisted he would have given him both money and a promotion for the one who killed Absalom. Yet the man would not do it out of loyalty to David. The military belt was the chief ornament of a soldier, and was highly prized in all ancient nations. It was also a rich present from one chieftain to another, from Clarke. He took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart. Joab didn't hesitate to strike Absalom, though he knew David commanded him not to. Joab was convinced that it was in David's best interest and in Israel's best interest to show Absalom justice, not mercy. Absalom only received what he deserved. He was a murderer, a traitor, and a rapist. Joab knew that David was generally indulgent toward his children and would never punish Absalom. He had seen David's actions toward his sons characterized by lack of discipline. In the high interests of the kingdom, his hand was raised to slay Absalom for Morgan. I was like, Absalom wasn't the well, these are my thoughts, but Absalom, I didn't think he was the rapist. That was Amnon. But then I realized that he raped the king's concubines on full view of the whole kingdom there. So yes, he was a rapist. We might say that Joab was correct, but not right. He was correct in understanding that it was better for David and for Israel that Absalom was dead. He was not right in disobeying King David, the God-appointed authority over him. By David's dealings with King Saul, we see that God can deal with those in authority, and we don't need to disobey them unless commanded to by Scripture or a clear conscience. Long ago, he should have died by the hand of justice, and now all his crimes are visited on him in his last act of rebellion. Yet in the present circumstances, Joab's act was base and disloyal, and a cowardly murder, from Clarke. Yeah. At the same time, there is an ironic twist in that the rebel Absalom had his life taken in a rebellious act by Joab. Absalom got what he deserved, and Joab would be held accountable for what he did to Absalom, both by God and eventually David. Yeah, I think David, not, well, during his lifetime, but he tells his son Solomon, Joab has been a thorn in my side for so long. Go deal with him, type thing. 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. Absalom was still not dead after 3 spears because heart is a general reference to the middle of the body instead of the specific internal organ. As he had defiled his father's 10 concubines, so these 10 youngsters he hath, that little breath that was left in him beaten out of his body from trap. They took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the woods, and laid a very large heap of stones over him. Joab wanted to make sure that Absalom's body was not memorialized as an inspiration to other followers or future rebels. And all Israel fled, everyone to his tent. This means Absalom's army was in full retreat. David's forces completely carried the day. Absalom, in his lifetime, had taken and set up a pillar for himself. This is what we would expect from a self-centered, self-promoting man like Absalom. Joab made sure that Absalom did not have a memorial in death, but Absalom made himself a memorial in life. I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. Absalom did have 3 sons. From this statement, we surmise that they died before their father did. You shall not take the news this day. Ahimaaz wanted to take David the news of Israel's victory and Absalom's death. But Joab wanted to spare Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, the burden of being the messenger of bad news. Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain, and outran the Cushite. Ahimaaz was faster than the other runner. Since the messenger was someone David knew, he assumed it was good news. Is the young man Absalom safe? This was David's only concern. He should have been more concerned for Israel as a nation than for his traitor son. At the same time, David's question is an example of the great bond of love between parent and child, and between God our Father and his children. He might have said, Is the young man Absalom dead? For if he is out of the way, there will be peace to my realm, and rest to my troubled life. But no, he is a father, and he must love his own offspring. It is a father that speaks, and a father's love can survive the enmity of a son. From Spurgeon. Also from Spurgeon, our children may plunge into the worst of sins, but they are our children still. They may scoff at our God. They may tear our heart to pieces with their wickedness. We cannot take complacency in them, but at the same time we cannot unchild them, nor erase their image from our hearts. I saw a great tumult, but I do not know what it was about. Compared to the Cushite, Ahimaaz was a better runner, but a worse messenger because he didn't know his message. A message can be delivered beautifully, but the messenger's first responsibility is to get the message correct. Yeah, I feel like he knew what he was doing here. Because Joab straight up told him that you don't have good news to deliver. And, yeah. So, I think he was edging for the reward. May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you to do harm be like that young man. Without saying it directly, the Cushite told David that Absalom was dead. The king was deeply moved. The Hebrew idea of deeply moved implies a violent trembling of the body. David felt completely undone at hearing the news of Absalom's death. In part, David was so deeply moved because he knew that he supplied the soil this tragedy grew from. The soil came from David's indulgent parenting. The soil came from David's sin with Bathsheba and murder of Uriah, after which God promised David, The sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. I will raise up adversity against you from your own house. From 2 Samuel 12, verses 10 and 11. The soil came from David's own sinful indulgence of his passions and smaller rebellions against God, which sins and weaknesses were magnified in his sons. Yeah. And in David's self-indulgent refusal to execute justice, Absalom seized on that and said to the people, I will execute justice, where you don't have that now. And so he swayed the people to his side. David's sorrow shows us that it isn't enough that parents train their children to be godly. They must first train themselves in godliness. We cannot stand in the presence of that suffering without learning the solemn lessons of parental responsibility it has to teach, not merely in training our children, but in that earlier training of ourselves for their sakes. From Morgan. Yeah. It's also put this way in the Bible that when the learner, having been trained by a teacher, is fully trained by his teacher, he isn't different from his teacher, but has everything essentially that the teacher has in him. Oh my, let me think. Where is this found? I am failing on this. Oh, Luke. Luke 6:40, somewhere around there. Someday I will get the reference here. A disciple is not greater than his teacher, but everyone, when fully trained, will be like his teacher. So, the idea is that when a person is fully trained, when he receives the summation of the teacher's teaching, then he'll be like his teacher. And in that way, parents will be like their children. Or children will be like their parents, sorry. For the good or for the bad. And so it's important for parents to train themselves in righteousness. Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. David mourned so much for Absalom because he really was his son. David saw his sins, his weaknesses, his rebellion exaggerated in Absalom. Everything in the story leads to and culminates in this wail of anguish over his dead boy. 5 times he repeated the words, "my son," from Morgan. This surely had a deeper note in it than that of the merely half-conscious repetition of words occasioned by personal grief. The father recognized how much he was responsible for the son. It is as though he had said, "He is indeed my son. His weaknesses are my weaknesses. His passions are my passions. His sins are my sins." From Morgan. Yeah. When the first son by Bathsheba died, was sick, and then died, David wept, but not like this. When Amnon died at the hands of Absalom, David wept, but not like this. If only I had died in your place. David wanted to die in the place of his rebellious son. What David could not do, God did, by dying in the place of rebellious sinners. So in the cry of David, we actually hear the cry of God for his lost children, his desire to restore, his desire to forgive. From Smith. Yeah, but Absalom continued in pig-headed rebellion to the end. The victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. This was not good. David's loyal and sacrificing supporters won that day for the glory of God and for the good of Israel. When they felt bad about the victory because David was overcome, then they felt bad about the victory because David was overcome with excessive weeping and mourning for Absalom. There is such a thing as excessive mourning, mourning that is basically rooted in unbelief and self-indulgence. In 1 Thessalonians 4:13, Paul warned Christians, "I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope." Some Christians sorrow at times in death or tragedy, like those who have no hope in God, and this is wrong to do. If your dear ones are dead, you cannot restore them to life by your unbelief, and if they still survive, it will be a pity to be downcast and unbelieving when there is no occasion for it. Your strength is to sit still. Remember that you are a Christian, and a Christian is expected to be more self-possessed than those who have no God to fly to. From Spurgeon. Yeah, we have great hope concerning life after death. So the people stole back into the city that day as people who are ashamed. David's excessive sorrow made his loyal friends and supporters feel ashamed they won a great victory. Oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. David could not stop singing this song. He was still locked into his excessive mourning and lack of perspective. He was mastered by his feelings, and feelings were never meant to master us. That being said, God is not against feelings, not at all. Many Christians lack deep and profound feeling and experience in their walk with God. At the same time, feelings were never meant to master over us. David's problem was not in what he knew, Absalom's tragic death and David's own role in it. David's problem was in what he forgot, that God was still in control, that a great victory was won, that he had many loyal supporters, and that God showed great grace and mercy to David. When someone is overcome in tragedy or sorrow, the problem is not in what they know, but in what they forget. Yeah, God's still on the throne, and a great supporter of David. Whoever heard David cry out in godly sorrow, "O Uriah, would God I had died for thee." Trap. Interesting. Today you have disgraced all your servants, who today have saved your life. Joab gave David a stern wake-up call. David, your excessive mourning is selfish. It isn't all about you. These loyal sacrificial supporters of yours deserve to feel good about their victory, and you're making them feel terrible. Snap out of it. Good advice from Joab. I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. This is a sharp truth delivered with precision. Joab wanted David not only to see that he was foolish in his excessive grief, but he was also selfish. Now therefore arise, go out and speak comfort to your servants. Go out and encourage the team. They deserve it. If you don't, you will lose most of them. Then the king arose and sat in the gate. David didn't feel like doing this. His feelings told him to stay locked into his excessive mourning. Yet David let his understanding of what was right be bigger than what he felt. We never again hear David crying out, "O Absalom," doing what he needed to do, got that song out of his head. So all the people came before the king. This is what they needed to see, David sitting as king in the place of authority that was sitting in the gate. This told them that their sacrifice was worth it, that it was appreciated, and that David would continue to reign. Joab's rebuke worked because Joab cared enough to say it, and David was wise enough to receive it. Yeah, and certainly these were hard words on Joab's behalf, but it was very good for him to say them. All the people were in a dispute throughout all the tribes of Israel. David survived Absalom's attempted overthrow, but the kingdom was not yet restored to David. The king saved us, but Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died. The tribes of Israel understood what David did for them. They understood that they rejected him and embraced Absalom, and they understood that Absalom was now dead. It left the people of Israel in a dispute about bringing back the king. They only seemed to want David back after the false king Absalom failed. In the same way, we often only decide to bring back King Jesus when our false kings fail. The folly of their allegiance to Absalom was clear. It had brought only misery and confusion. They were on the wrong side. They had rejected their true king, and therefore the situation was full of unrest. From Redpath. Yeah, lots there. Yeah, I think when we don't follow God, we choose some pretty tangled paths for ourselves. And when David didn't follow God in the punishment of his sons, when he didn't follow God in controlling his lusts, it created fertile ground for this future, or past in our case, rebellion of his son Absalom and the violent death of his son Absalom. So I think it's important to recognize that our silent sins, the sins that we think that nobody sees, do have an effect and provide a fortification for the enemy to launch attacks against us. And so it was in the case of David and Absalom here. It's important for us to be self-possessed. That's one of the fruits of the Spirit, self-control. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything else. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.